The dim glow from the ceiling light flickered erratically, barely illuminating the cramped, stifling room. The air smelled of stale alcohol and cheap tobacco, a scent that had become all too familiar to Serena Hale over the years. She sat stiffly on the sunken couch, her fingers digging into the worn fabric, knuckles white. Across from her, Gerald Hale drummed his fingers against the wooden table, a slow, deliberate rhythm that set her teeth on edge. "You don't have a choice, girl," he slurred, his voice thick from whiskey. "This is happening." Serena forced down the bile rising in her throat. She had always known her uncle was a cruel man, but this was a different level of betrayal. "I'm not some animal to be sold off," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor she couldn't quite hide. Gerald chuckled, the sound low and mocking. He leaned forward, the dim light casting shadows across his sharp features. "You think your opinion matters?" His breath reeked of liquor, his smirk revealing yellowed teeth. "You've been living under my roof, eating my food. That means you owe me." The words struck harder than they should have. Serena knew there was no real debt, only an excuse for power, control. For years she had survived his neglect, his rage, his greed. She had dreamed of leaving, but dreams didn't mean freedom when you had nothing. And now, he was making sure she would never escape. A contract marriage. She had overheard whispers of it before this moment, catching fragments of conversation through thin walls. A business arrangement. A deal struck with Lucien Vale, a man whose name carried weight in circles far beyond her reach. A billionaire. A ghost in the public eye. A man whose power loomed so large that people spoke of him only in hushed voices. "I'd rather die." The words left her lips before she could stop them. Gerald's expression darkened, the amusement fading from his face. "That's not an option." He reached for a folder on the table and tossed it toward her. It landed with a dull thud, the thick stack of papers inside an unspoken sentence. Serena hesitated before glancing down. The pages were crisp, official. Her name was printed neatly in black ink, and beneath it, a signature. Her own. Her chest tightened. "You can either walk through that door tomorrow on your own," Gerald said, his tone laced with mockery, "or they'll drag you there. Either way, you'll be his wife." The weight of those words settled around her, suffocating. There was no escape, no safety, no one to turn to. "Why does he need a wife?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Gerald shrugged, already pouring himself another drink. "Men like him don't explain themselves." His lips curled into a smirk. "All I know is he paid enough to wipe my debts clean." He raised the glass in mock celebration. "And you get to live in luxury. Could be worse, huh?" A sharp, bitter taste coated Serena's tongue. She had no choices left, no way out. But marrying a man like Lucien Vale, a man who had to purchase a wife, felt less like an escape and more like another prison. She pushed herself to her feet, knocking the folder to the floor. "I'll find a way out of this," she muttered. Gerald barely spared her a glance. "Go ahead and try." Serena stormed out of the room, her heart pounding. The odds were impossible, but she had been fighting her entire life, and she wasn't about to stop now, even if it meant standing against Lucien Vale himself. The wedding was as hollow as the contract that bound them. No flowers, no guests, no vows spoken with even the pretense of affection. The ceremony took place in the private study of Lucien Vale's estate, where the air smelled of polished wood and old money. The officiant, a man so uninterested he barely glanced up from the papers, read the necessary lines in a monotone voice, reducing what should have been a life-altering event into nothing more than a formality. Serena sat beside Lucien at the grand mahogany table, her fingers gripping the carved armrest of the chair. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, suffocating in its finality. She stole a glance at the man who, on paper, was now her husband. Lucien Vale. Composed, detached. His sharp features were framed by the precision of an expensive suit, his every movement deliberate and controlled. There was no flicker of emotion, no hint of hesitation, an untouchable force. Serena had expected a brute, someone cruel and overbearing, a man who would take pleasure in owning her. But this was worse, an enigma. If he felt anything at all about this arrangement, he gave no sign of it. "Sign." Lucien slid the last document toward her, his voice even, as if issuing a command was second nature. Serena's stomach twisted. This was the last step, the final moment before her fate was sealed. She hesitated, the pen feeling foreign in her fingers. "This means nothing to you, does it?" Lucian finally lifted his gaze to hers, his eyes an unreadable shade of stormy gray. "I don't need a wife," he said, his tone measured, devoid of warmth. "Just a name on a document. A name, a signature, a transaction." Her fingers tightened around the pen. Somehow she had expected anger, dominance, something that would at least make sense of what was happening. But this absolute indifference felt far worse. Who was this man? She signed her name. The officiant collected the papers, nodded without ceremony, and left. Legally binding. Congratulations, it was done. Silence stretched between them like an abyss. Serena sat still, waiting for something. A word, a glance, anything that would acknowledge what had just happened. But Lucian simply stood, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeve, moving as if this had been nothing more than another business deal to check off his list. "Your room has been prepared," he said flatly. "You'll be taken there now." Serena blinked. "That's it?" Lucian tilted his head slightly, observing her with mild curiosity. "What were you expecting? A cruel smirk? A taunting remark? Some indication that she was now his? Instead, she was faced with a man who didn't even seem to care that she existed. He turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "I don't expect anything from you, Serena. Don't expect anything from me." Then he was gone. Serena exhaled, her hands trembling against the heavy fabric of her dress. She had been sold into this marriage, but the man who had bought her barely even acknowledged her presence, and that left her with only one question. If he didn't want a wife, why did he need one? The estate was breathtaking, but it wasn't a home. Serena stood in the vast entry hall, where the marble floors gleamed like a mirror under the glow of an elaborate chandelier. Everything around her spoke of wealth, power, perfection, yet there was no warmth. No sign that life had ever existed here, only silence so profound it felt unnatural. A tall woman with a professional smile stepped forward, her posture rigid with trained politeness. "Your room is ready, Mrs. Val." The title made Serena's stomach churn. Without a word she followed, her steps nearly soundless against the polished floors. The grand staircase led to a maze of corridors, endless doors stretching in both directions. She had never seen so much space in her life, and yet she had never felt more trapped. When they reached the far end of the hall, the woman opened the door to her suite. Serena stepped inside. Lavish, immaculate, larger than any place she had ever lived. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of the estate's private gardens, where roses bloomed in neat, calculated rows. A canopy bed stood at the center of the room, its pristine white sheets untouched, as if no one had ever dared to sleep there. But despite the beauty, the grandeur suffocated her. She wasn't welcome here. She wasn't wanted. She was just a name on a contract, signed and sealed. And for the first time since walking through these doors, a chilling thought settled in her bones. She had escaped one prison. Serena stood motionless in the center of her suite, her gaze sweeping over the carefully curated elegance that surrounded her. The massive bed, far too large for someone who had spent her life curled up in cramped spaces, remained untouched, its crisp white sheets undisturbed, as if no one had ever dared to sleep there. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the estate's private gardens stretched into the distance, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. The roses were in perfect bloom, their petals unfurling like something out of a dream. But like everything else here, the beauty felt artificial, controlled, like it had been arranged for display rather than for life. Lucian, of course, was nowhere to be found. He had signed the papers, walked away, and that was the end of it. Serena took a slow step forward, pressing her fingers against the heavy velvet drapes. Everything in this house was heavy, the furniture, the silence, even the air itself. It was as if the walls held secrets they refused to give up. A sharp knock at the door made her spin around. Before she could respond, the door swung open, revealing a man she had never seen before. He was lean, sharply dressed, with an effortless confidence that suggested he was always in on some private joke. He leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. "You must be the new bride," he drawled, his tone laced with amusement. "Congratulations or condolences. I suppose that depends on your perspective." Serena eyed him warily. "And you are?" The man pushed off the doorframe, stepping further inside without an invitation. "Rowan Carter," he said smoothly. "I handle Val's affairs when he's too busy pretending to have none." She narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" Rowan chuckled, his gaze drifting lazily around the room as if he had already seen it 100 times before. "It means, sweetheart, that you should stop trying to figure him out." He looked back at her then, the humor in his expression fading just slightly. "You won't like what you find." Something in his voice sent a prickle of unease down her spine. Before she could question him further, Rowan nodded toward the hallway. "Stay out of trouble, Mrs. Vale." Then, in a lower voice, his smirk now completely gone, he added, "And whatever you do, don't go near the locked room at the end of the west wing." Serena's pulse quickened. "Why?" she asked, but Rowan was already turning away. "Because some doors aren't meant to be opened." And then he was gone. The morning after the wedding, Serena woke to a suffocating kind of silence. No shouting, no clattering of dishes, no reminders of the chaos she had grown up with, just stillness. It felt wrong. She dressed quickly, ignoring the luxurious dresses carefully laid out for her by the staff. She wouldn't play the role of Lucien's perfect doll. Instead, she chose a simple black blouse and fitted slacks, a small rebellion against the gilded cage she had been locked inside. When she stepped into the hallway, a guard was already stationed outside her door. He barely looked at her as he nodded in acknowledgement. "Mrs. Vale?" Serena ignored him. If she was trapped in this place, she was at least going to understand what kind of prison it was. She didn't get far. Lucien was already waiting for her at the bottom of the grand staircase, arms crossed over his chest. He looked flawless, effortless, composed. Too put together for a man who had supposedly just gained a wife. Serena met his gaze and didn't slow her steps. "You had guards outside my door." Lucien tilted his head slightly. "That surprises you?" "It insults me," she shot back. He let out a slow exhale as if she were an inconvenience he had no patience for. "You have full access to the estate," he said evenly, "as long as you stay within the boundaries I set." Serena stopped on the last step, crossing her arms. "Boundaries?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "You mean rules." Lucien's lips quirked, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "Rules keep people alive." A chill ghosted down her spine. Before she could push further, a voice interrupted. "We're late." Rowan appeared at the entrance, immaculate in an expensive suit, his smirk firmly back in place. He glanced at Serena, his tone teasing. "And you, darling, need to get changed." Serena frowned. "Changed?" Lucien's gaze flickered over her outfit, disapproval barely concealed. "There's a charity event tonight. We'll be attending." She lifted a brow. "I wasn't aware I had a schedule." Lucien's lips curved slightly, but his eyes remained unreadable. "You do now." Serena didn't know why, but something about the way he said it made her pulse quicken. As if tonight wasn't just about appearances. It was about control. And she wasn't sure who was controlling whom anymore. The ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence, filled with sharp smiles and whispered speculation. Serena moved through the crowd, Lucien at her side, their every step tracked by curious onlookers. Eyes lingered on her, people murmuring behind their champagne glasses. The mysterious new bride? Val finally settling down? What's the catch? Married so suddenly, it doesn't make sense. She was meant to play a role, to be the elegant, silent woman at Lucien's side, the perfect illusion of devotion. But the air in the room was thick, suffocating, every word rehearsed, every movement calculated. And yet, Lucien himself seemed utterly unaffected, as though none of it touched him. Then, a voice cut through the polished hum of the evening. "Lucien, we were beginning to think you'd never settle down." Serena turned to see a man approaching, his smile smooth as silk, his confidence that of someone accustomed to power. Victor Calloway. There was no formal introduction, no need for one. His name was spoken in exclusive circles with equal parts admiration and fear. And though he was addressing Lucien, his gaze flickered toward Serena, curiosity evident in his sharp eyes. And so suddenly, too. Lucien didn't react, but Serena felt the shift in the air, the subtle tightening of his posture. A silent battle neither man was willing to acknowledge outright. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "You say that like he's incapable of commitment." Victor's smile widened, but there was something cold in it. "Oh, we all know Lucien Vale isn't the type for sentimental ties." Serena held his gaze, matching his expression with one of quiet amusement. Then I must be very persuasive. She felt Lucian's fingers tighten slightly against hers. Just a flicker of acknowledgement, but enough. Hooking her arm through his, she added smoothly, "But then again, my husband never does anything he doesn't want to." Lucian let out a barely there chuckle, his eyes flicking toward her with something that almost resembled amusement. Victor's smirk faltered just slightly. For the first time that evening, Serena felt like she had won something. But the way Victor watched them, his expression calculating, his interest unmistakable, made her stomach twist. Lucian had enemies, and they were watching. The attack came without warning. Serena had been in the library, trailing her fingers over the spines of books she had no intention of reading. She hadn't been able to sleep, her mind too restless, the weight of the evening still pressing down on her. Then, a noise. A shift in the air. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but waiting. She turned just as two men stepped inside. They weren't staff. She knew that instantly. One was tall, broad-shouldered, his expensive suit doing little to soften the dangerous edge in his stance. The other was leaner, with a casual ease that somehow made him seem even more threatening. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Neither of them spoke. They were waiting for her to panic. She refused. "I don't believe we've met," she said, keeping her voice steady, controlled. The taller man smirked. "No, we haven't, but we're here with a message." He took a step forward. Serena moved before she could think. She turned sharply, dashing for the door. But a hand snatched her wrist, yanking her back so hard she stumbled, her body colliding with the bookshelf. Pain jolted through her side, but she barely had time to react before a hand clamped over her mouth. Not so fast. Her pulse roared in her ears as she fought, kicking, twisting, struggling, but his grip was unyielding, his strength far greater than hers. "Listen carefully," the man growled against her ear. "Your husband has enemies, sweetheart, powerful ones. And you're the weak link." The second man crouched in front of her, his head tilting in mock curiosity. "You're going to deliver a message for us," he said. "Tell Lucian to step down, walk away." Serena's breathing turned ragged, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Or what?" she demanded. The man smiled. "Or next time we won't be so polite." Then, the door slammed open. The air shifted instantly, as if the entire room had been struck by lightning. His presence was a storm, cold and electric, filling every inch of the space. The man holding Serena barely had time to react before Lucian moved. Swift, merciless, calculated. One strike. The first man crashed against the bookshelf, books tumbling down around him. The second barely reached for a weapon before Lucian struck again, sharp and controlled, leaving both men gasping for air on the floor. The library fell into silence. Serena pressed a hand to the bookshelf behind her, her breath unsteady, her heart still hammering. Lucian straightened, adjusting the cuffs of his suit, completely composed, as if he hadn't just taken down two men without breaking a sweat. Then his gaze found hers, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something crack beneath his detachment. Fury, possessiveness, something deeper, darker. He took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning her for injuries. His movements were sharp, but controlled. His fingers brushed lightly against her wrist, ghosting over the bruises forming there. Something dark flickered in his expression. "This won't happen again," he murmured, voice low, dangerous in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. And for the first time, Serena believed him. But she also realized something else. Lucian wasn't protecting her just because she was his wife. There was more to this, and she needed to find out what. Serena pressed herself against the bookshelf, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, the sharp scent of leather paper mixing with the metallic tang of fear still clinging to her skin. Lucian stood over the two unconscious men, straightening his cuffs with the kind of cold precision that made it seem as though he had merely adjusted his suit, not just taken down two intruders with effortless brutality. When his gaze lifted to hers, it burned with something dark and unreadable. "You have no idea what you've been thrown into," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. Serena exhaled shakily, still feeling the phantom weight of her attacker's hands on her skin. Her wrist ached where she had been grabbed, her body still wired with adrenaline. Lucian stepped closer, his movements controlled, calculated, But there was something different this time. His detachment cracked just slightly. He reached out, fingers ghosting over the faint bruise forming on her wrist. His touch was light, but the way his jaw tensed told her he saw it. "This won't happen again," he murmured, the promise laced with something deadly. And for the first time since stepping into this house, Serena believed him. But it wasn't enough, because she had realized something else. Lucian wasn't just protecting her because of their forced marriage. There was more to this. More to him. And she needed to find out what. The weight of the attack clung to Serena's skin like a bruise that refused to fade, sinking into her bones. The mansion, vast, cold, suffocating in its silence, felt smaller with each passing second, its walls pressing in on her like an invisible force. Lucian might have saved her tonight, but he had also trapped her. She refused to play his pawn in whatever dangerous game he was involved in. So she planned. She spent the day watching the security rotation, noting gaps in their patrols. The front gates were impossible, but the back gardens stretched into a dense forest. If she was fast enough, she could disappear into the shadows before anyone noticed she was gone. It had to work. That night, Serena dressed in dark clothes, slipping into sneakers instead of the impractical heels they had provided for her. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she cracked the door open, peering down the empty hallway. The guards weren't in sight. Now, she slipped into the corridor, her movements quick but silent, staying close to the shadows. One turn, then another, down the grand staircase, across the marble floors. The cool night air hit her skin as she reached the back terrace. Just a few more steps. And then, going somewhere, her breath caught. Lucian. He stood by the terrace doors, hands tucked into his pockets, his posture deceptively relaxed. The soft glow of the garden lights cast long shadows across his sharp features, but his eyes, dark, knowing, never left hers. Serena's fingers twitched at her sides. "Move." He didn't. She took a step back, but he was faster, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. She lashed out, trying to push past him, but he caught her wrist. Not hard, not painful, just firm enough to hold her in place. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "Do you really think they won't come for you?" She yanked at her arm, but his grip didn't budge. "I'll take my chances." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "There are no chances, Serena." Something in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. His fingers loosened slightly, just enough for her to breathe, but his next words were sharper than steel. "The men who broke into this house weren't just here for a warning. They were testing my reach, my control." Her throat tightened. "Do you know what happens if they find you alone?" Serena swallowed but refused to let him see fear. "You don't own me, Lucian." He exhaled slowly, his fingers dragging down her wrist before finally letting go. But he didn't move away. He stayed close, towering, unyielding, immovable. "I never said I did." His voice was lower now, something dangerous woven beneath the words. "But I am the only thing keeping you alive." The words stung because deep down, she knew they were true. She had thought Lucian was the enemy. But now, she wasn't so sure anymore, because the real enemy was still out there, waiting for her to make a mistake. And tonight, she had almost handed herself to them. The realization settled in her chest like a stone, heavy and suffocating. Lucian must have seen the shift in her expression, because his stance relaxed just slightly. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. "I can't let you go." "Not yet," Lucian murmured, his voice quiet but firm. Serena clenched her fists, the remnants of her escape plan turning to ash in her mind. For the first time, the truth settled in her chest like a cold weight. This wasn't just about being trapped in a marriage she never wanted. She wasn't just a prisoner of circumstance. She was a target, and Lucian Dantes was the only shield she had. The next morning, Serena awoke to a different kind of prison. Security had doubled overnight. Guards patrolled the hallways, stationed at every entrance, as though she were some high-value asset, not just an unwilling wife bound by contract. The sight of them, silent, imposing, ever-present, made her skin crawl. Her frustration boiled over before she even left her room. She yanked open the door, only to find a broad-shouldered guard blocking her path. He barely even glanced at her. "Move." The man didn't flinch. "No can do, Mrs. Dantes," he replied flatly. "Mr. Dantes' orders." Serena's jaw clenched as she slammed the door shut, biting back a curse. It wasn't enough that he dictated her life. decided where she could go, whom she could see. Now, he had taken away her right to move freely altogether. She refused to let it stand. Dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, her own quiet rebellion against the luxurious, restrictive dresses that had been chosen for her, Serena stormed through the mansion, ignoring the lingering stares of the staff. She found him in his office, standing behind his sleek, polished desk, flipping through documents like the world outside his fortress wasn't closing in on her like a noose. "You doubled the security," she accused, her voice sharp as she stopped just short of his desk. Lucian barely glanced up. "Good morning to you too." "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't pretend this is normal. I can't even step into the hallway without feeling like a hostage." Finally, his gray eyes lifted to hers, unreadable, calculating. "I told you, Serena," he said coolly. "They won't stop coming for you." "And you think trapping me inside is the solution?" "Yes." His bluntness knocked the breath from her lungs. She shook her head, taking a step closer. "You can't just lock me away like some fragile thing." Lucian sighed, setting his papers down before leaning back against the desk, his gaze steady. "You don't understand what these people are capable of." "No, I don't," she shot back. "Because no one tells me anything." Something in his expression flickered for the first time. Hesitation. A long silence stretched between them. Then, as if coming to a decision, Lucian rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. The movement was casual, almost careless, until she saw them. Scars. Thin, pale lines slashed across the skin of his forearms, some shallow, others deeper, old wounds that had healed but never disappeared. Serena stared, unable to mask the sudden hitch in her breath. Lucian followed her gaze but didn't move to hide them. Instead, he slowly turned his wrist, revealing one particular scar, jagged and brutal, running from the base of his palm all the way up toward his elbow. Serena's stomach twisted. She wanted to ask, how? She stopped herself, pressing her lips together, but Lucian must have sensed the unspoken question. "A reminder," he said, his voice low, edged with something she couldn't quite place. "Of what?" she asked quietly. His eyes met hers, unreadable. "Of what happens when you trust the wrong people." For a moment, the office felt too small, too quiet. Serena shouldn't have cared. She shouldn't have let it affect her. But it did, because the air between them had shifted, not quite soft, not quite sharp, but charged with something neither of them were ready to name. She didn't reach for him, didn't offer meaningless words of sympathy. Instead, she met his gaze head-on. "You think locking me away will stop them?" Lucian studied her for a long moment. "No." His voice was softer now, almost reluctant. "But it might give me enough time to stop them first." Her breath caught. This wasn't just about power. It wasn't just about control. It was about something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to understand. And yet, as she turned to leave, she could feel his eyes on her. Watching, waiting, and for the first time since she had stepped into this house, she wasn't sure if she hated the feeling. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Towering chandeliers bathed the gilded walls in golden light, the scent of champagne and expensive perfume lingering in the air. Everywhere Serena looked, there were people dressed in their finest, draped in wealth, status, and carefully curated smiles. Yet to her, it felt less like a gala and more like a stage, a place where masks were fixed in place, and every word, every glance, every touch was calculated. She adjusted the sleek black gown Lucian had arranged for her, the fabric smooth and dangerously perfect against her skin. The weight of a diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, a cold reminder of the position she had been forced into. Beside her, Lucian Dantes was a vision of controlled power, his crisp black suit tailored to perfection, every detail meticulous, every movement exuding quiet dominance. He didn't need to command attention. He was the kind of man the room gravitated toward without a single word. "You'll stay by my side," he murmured, his voice low and firm as they stepped further into the crowd. "Smile when necessary. Speak only when spoken to." Serena arched a brow. "And what if someone asks me an actual question?" Lucian's lips twitched, but his expression remained unreadable. "Then make sure your answer serves a purpose." It was an order, not a request. She didn't respond, but she understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't just about appearances. It was about control, about sending a message to his enemies, reminding them that she was his. And yet, the more time she spent around him, the more she noticed something unsettling. Lucian wasn't unaffected by her presence. It was in the way his fingers tensed ever so slightly when he placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the room. It was in the way his jaw clenched whenever another man's gaze lingered on her for too long. It was in the way his storm-gray eyes darkened when she deliberately leaned in, brushing her lips close to his ear, and whispered, "You like owning things, don't you?" His fingers twitched against her waist. "I don't own you, Serena." His voice was even, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something strained, something he didn't want her to see. She turned, meeting his gaze head-on. "Then what is this?" He didn't answer, because before he could, a familiar voice cut through the room like a knife. "Lucien." Serena turned, just as a man strode toward them with a practiced smile. Victor Kane. There was something about him that immediately set her on edge. His sharp suit, the effortless charm in his voice, the way his gaze flicked to her and lingered just a second too long. Lucien's posture stiffened beside her. His grip on her waist tightened ever so slightly. "Victor." His greeting was cool, detached. Victor's smirk widened as he turned his attention back to Serena. "And you must be the infamous wife." Serena forced a polite smile. "I suppose that makes you the infamous enemy." Victor let out a soft chuckle, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "She's sharp, Lucien. I like her." Lucien's grip tightened, possessive warning. "She's not here for your entertainment." Victor's smirk didn't fade. Instead, he raised his glass in a mock toast. "Pity." Then, as effortlessly as he had arrived, he melted back into the sea of guests. Serena exhaled slowly, sensing the tension radiating from Lucien. "You're wound too tight," she murmured, keeping her voice light. "You should enjoy your own party." His eyes flicked to hers, something unreadable lurking beneath. "You think I enjoy these things?" She tilted her head. "No, but you pretend well." His gaze dropped, briefly, to her lips, and just like that, something shifted. Lucien's grip on her waist softened, but he didn't remove his hand. Instead, he guided her onto the dance floor, ignoring her slight resistance. "We're dancing?" she asked, brow raised. "People are watching." Serena shouldn't have cared, shouldn't have let it affect her. But when his hand slid over hers, when his other pressed firmly against the small of her back, she felt her breath hitch. Lucien Dantes was a man who commanded space, but here, in this moment, he was impossibly close. The world blurred around them as he led her across the floor, their movements smooth, effortless. She should have been thinking about the eyes watching them, the game they were playing, the war brewing beneath their feet. Instead, all she could think about was his touch, his breath, the way his grip tightened every time she leaned in just a little too close, and the way it terrified her how much she liked it. Serena's voice was barely a whisper as they danced, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Do you do this often?" Lucien tilted his head slightly, his grip firm yet effortless. "What?" His voice was low, unreadable. "Pretend to be someone you're not." Something flickered in his gaze, quick as a shadow. His hand tightened just slightly around hers. "I don't pretend," he said, his tone even. "I adapt." Serena searched his face, looking for cracks in the mask he wore so well. A glimpse of something real. And then, something unexpected happened. Lucien's fingers brushed lightly against her bare back, the touch feather-light, fleeting. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. A shiver ran through her before she could stop it. She leaned in, just a little closer, close enough that her breath ghosted against his cheek. His grip faltered. It lasted only a second, so brief she almost missed it. But it was there. A hesitation, a slip. And before she could think better of it, before she could stop herself, she whispered, "You feel it too, don't you?" Lucien went rigid. For the first time since she met him, his mask cracked, his gaze darkened, his eyes flickering to her lips. The air between them changed, thick, charged, waiting. He was going to kiss her. She could see it, feel it, taste the anticipation between them. But then, he pulled away. The moment shattered just as quickly as it had formed. Lucien stepped back, his expression unreadable once more. "This changes nothing," he murmured, his voice lower, rougher. Serena lifted her chin, ignoring the sting of rejection, masking it with a smirk. "If you say so." But they both knew the truth. He wanted her, and it was killing him. The mansion at night was too quiet, not the peaceful kind Serena had once loved, but the kind that felt heavy, expectant. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And tonight, it would. She wasn't sure what had drawn her to Lucian's office, but once she stepped inside, she knew. She wouldn't leave empty-handed. The room was as imposing as the man himself. Dark wood, cold edges, everything carefully in its place. Shelves lined with books, the kind meant for decoration rather than reading. But she wasn't interested in books. She was looking for something real. Her fingers skimmed over the desk, pulling open drawers one by one. Lucian was meticulous, everything perfectly arranged, except for the bottom drawer. A stack of papers had been shoved carelessly aside as if someone had meant to hide them in a hurry. A strange unease crawled up her spine as she reached inside, pulling out a thin, folded document. The edges were creased, the paper worn from years of handling. And then, her breath caught. She recognized the names, her parents. The paper trembled in her hands as she unfolded it, scanning the text. It was a contract. Not a marriage contract like hers, but something else entirely. The words blurred together, but the message was clear. Her parents had made a deal with Lucian Dantes, and whatever it was, it had cost them everything. A voice behind her made her spin, her heart hammering. Rowan. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression too careful to be casual. "You really shouldn't be in here," he said, but there was no real scolding in his tone. Serena swallowed. "You knew." Rowan sighed, stepping further into the room. "I know a lot of things." His gaze flicked to the paper in her hands, but he didn't try to take it from her. "But I also know that if you're looking for the truth, you won't like what you find." Serena clenched her jaw. "Then tell me." Rowan hesitated, and that alone confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just a coincidence. "Serena," he said carefully, "if you uncover his past, be prepared for the consequences." A chill ran down her spine, but she was done being in the dark. Without another word, she pushed past him and went to find Lucian. She found him on the balcony, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his silhouette carved against the night sky. For a moment, she hesitated. He looked tired. Not just physically, but in a way that settled deep into his bones. But then she remembered the document clenched in her fist. She remembered why she was here, and the anger surged back. The cool night air pressed against Serena's skin as she stood on the balcony, the document clenched in her fist like a burning brand. Lucian hadn't moved. He stood there, whiskey in hand, his silhouette sharp against the city skyline, as if her words hadn't sliced through the carefully maintained walls around him. But she saw it. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers tightened around the glass just slightly, the way he didn't turn to look at her. "You knew my parents." It wasn't a question. Lucian still said nothing. Serena stepped closer, her pulse hammering. "How long were you planning to keep that from me?" Silence. Her frustration snapped. She slammed the document onto the railing beside him, the crisp paper stark against the dark wood. "Say something." Lucian finally turned. His expression was unreadable, but beneath the surface she saw it, a storm brewing, barely contained. "This isn't a conversation you want to have." Her heart pounded. "That's not your choice to make." Lucian exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Your parents made a deal, Serena. One that ended badly. That's all you need to know." A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "That's all I need to know?" Her voice was sharp, incredulous. "They died, Lucian, and somehow you were part of their world." Silence. And then, his walls went up. She saw it happen in real time, the way his expression shuddered, the way the tension in his body shifted from something raw and conflicted to something closed off. Lucian Dantes was many things, but above all, he was a man who controlled what people knew about him. And right now, he was choosing to keep her blind. Serena shook her head, stepping back. "You told me I had no idea what I'd been thrown into." "Maybe you're right." Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to keep going. "But you're the one keeping me in the dark." Lucian said nothing, did nothing, and somehow, that hurt more than any answer he could have given. A bitter laugh escaped her lips as she turned toward the doorway. "You can lock me in this house, surround me with guards, pretend you're protecting me, but you can't stop me from finding out the truth." She had barely taken 2 steps before his voice cut through the air, low and edged with something dangerous. "Serena." She paused, but she didn't turn back. His next words were almost a whisper, barely carried by the wind. I didn't want you in this. A pause. Then, I tried to keep you out of it. Her stomach twisted, but when she spoke, her voice was cold. Then you shouldn't have married me. And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing there, whiskey in hand, but for the first time, not in control. The note arrived that night. Serena found it slipped beneath her door, a single folded piece of paper lying like a silent threat on the floor. She hesitated before picking it up, her fingers trembling slightly. The message was simple: come alone, or the answers die with me. No name, no signature. But she knew. Victor. Her blood ran cold. She should have ignored it, should have gone straight to Lucian, or at least to Rowan. But the weight of Lucian's silence still lingered in her chest like a wound that refused to heal. If she wanted the truth, she would have to take it herself. The restaurant was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place people went when they wanted to discuss things that would never be recorded. Serena stepped inside, every muscle in her body coiled with unease. The dining area was empty, save for a single table at the back, where Victor Calloway sat, a glass of wine in hand. His expression was one of mild amusement as he watched her approach. He gestured toward the seat across from him. Brave of you to come, he mused. Or reckless, I haven't decided yet. Serena didn't sit. You wanted to talk, start talking. Victor tilted his head, his gaze dragging over her, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. She hated it. You're very direct, he noted, a quality I can admire. But let's not pretend you hold the power in this conversation. Serena clenched her fists. You said you had answers. Victor smiled. I do. A pause. Then, and I could give them to you. I could tell you exactly why Lucian refuses to let you see the past, why your parents were involved in things you can't begin to imagine. But his smile widened, slow and deliberate. Knowledge comes with a price. Serena's breath hitched. What price? Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. Leave Lucian. The words hit her like a physical blow. Serena blinked. Excuse me? Victor's smirk didn't falter. Lucian is dangerous, he said, voice smooth as silk. You know that. He's not protecting you, Serena. He's using you, and if you stay, you'll end up like everyone else who's ever been close to him. His gaze sharpened, his voice dropping even lower. Destroyed. Serena wanted to dismiss him, wanted to tell him he was lying, but doubt curled in her chest like smoke. Lucian had lied to her. He had kept things from her. And Victor was offering her the truth. She hesitated, and that was her mistake. Because the second her body shifted, the sound of a door slamming open sent her heart into her throat. The air changed. Lucian. He moved like a storm, fast and lethal, his cold fury making the entire room feel 10 degrees colder. Victor barely reacted, only lifting his glass with that same infuriating smirk as Lucian closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. You made a mistake, Lucian murmured, his voice dangerously low. Victor arched a brow. Did I? Lucian didn't answer. He was already moving. With one swift motion, he grabbed Victor by the collar and slammed him against the wall. The table rattled. The restaurant staff didn't react. They knew better. Victor let out a rough chuckle, his lips curling at the edges. Still as predictable as ever, I see. Lucian's grip tightened. His knuckles turned white. You think you can touch what's mine? Serena's breath caught. Victor's gaze flicked to her, amusement dancing in his eyes. See, he murmured. You are a possession after all. Lucian pulled back, only to slam Victor against the wall again, harder this time. Serena had never seen him like this. Not cold, not detached. Rage, pure, unrestrained rage. And for the first time she realized she had no idea what Lucian Dantes was truly capable of. Serena's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she stared at Victor across the table. His smirk was razor-sharp, his eyes glinting with amusement, as if he already knew exactly how this conversation would end. I could give you the answers you're looking for, he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. I could tell you why Lucian has kept you in the dark, why your parents were involved in things most people wouldn't dare touch. But he tilted his head, watching her like a cat toying with its prey. Knowledge always comes with a price. Serena swallowed hard, bracing herself. What price? Victor leaned forward, lowering his voice as if they were sharing some intimate secret. Leave him. Her blood turned to ice. Excuse me? she whispered. Victor's smirk widened, but there was nothing remotely friendly in it. Lucien Dantes is dangerous, Serena. You already know that. He's not protecting you. He's using you. And if you stay, you'll end up like everyone else who's ever gotten too close to him. His gaze flickered, something darker creeping into his expression. Destroyed. Serena's stomach twisted, but she refused to look away. She wanted to dismiss him, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but doubt curled in her chest like smoke, suffocating. Lucien had lied to her, and Victor was offering her the truth. That single moment of hesitation, that was her mistake. Because before she could move, before she could even take a breath, the door slammed open. The air shifted. A sudden, suffocating weight filled the room. Lucien? He moved like a storm, fast, violent, unrelenting. Cold fury darkened his features, making the temperature in the room feel 10 degrees lower. Victor didn't flinch, but his smirk sharpened. Lucien closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You made a mistake," he murmured, his voice like a blade. Victor arched a brow, unconcerned. "Did I?" Lucien didn't bother answering. He was already moving. In one swift motion, he grabbed Victor by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard that the table rattled. Serena barely had time to react. The restaurant staff didn't move. They knew better. Victor let out a rough chuckle, barely winded. "Still as predictable as ever, I see." Lucien's grip tightened, his knuckles white with fury. His voice dropped to something even deadlier. "You think you can touch what's mine?" Serena's breath caught in her throat. Victor's gaze flickered toward her, amusement flashing in his eyes. "See?" he murmured, his lips curling. "You are a possession after all." Lucien slammed him against the wall again, harder this time. Serena had never seen him like this. Not cold, not detached. This was rage. Pure, violent, simmering rage. "Lucien," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He didn't move, didn't blink. For a moment, she wasn't sure if he would stop. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he let go. Victor straightened, adjusting his shirt, smoothing out the fabric like he hadn't just been seconds away from getting his throat crushed. He exhaled, shaking his head, his smirk faltering just slightly. "You're going to regret this." Lucien exhaled slowly, his control razor thin. Then, almost casually, he smiled. "That implies I've ever regretted anything." And with that, he grabbed Serena's wrist and pulled her out of the restaurant without another word. The car ride back was silent. Serena sat stiffly in the passenger seat, still shaken from what had just happened. Lucien's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles pale in the dim light. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she turned to him, her voice quiet but demanding. "How did you know where I was?" His jaw clenched. "You think I wouldn't have you followed?" A sharp mix of irritation and guilt burned in her chest. "I was just trying to get answers." She shot back. Lucien let out a sharp breath, his control fraying at the edges. "And you thought going straight to Victor Calloway was the way to do it?" "I thought he'd actually tell me the truth." Lucien's grip tightened on the wheel. "Victor doesn't offer truth, Serena. He offers manipulation, wrapped in just enough honesty to make you believe him." She turned to face him fully, her pulse still erratic. "Then tell me the truth, Lucien." A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he said nothing. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Unspoken emotions. Lucien had been willing to tear Victor apart for even daring to threaten her, but he still wouldn't tell her why, and that scared her more than anything, because the truth had been sitting in front of her the whole time, hidden beneath half-truths, buried beneath all the walls Lucien Dantes had so carefully built. He had known her parents, and yet he still refused to tell her what really happened, and Serena wasn't sure she could live with that. The realization crashed into Serena like a tidal wave, fierce and unrelenting. Lucien hadn't just known her parents in passing. They weren't some distant business connection buried in a forgotten ledger. He had known them. Personally, intimately. And yet he had said nothing. The betrayal burned through her veins, searing, blistering, leaving nothing but fury in its wake. By the time she reached his office, she was shaking. Lucien stood by the window, his back to her, posture tense. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence, but something about the way his shoulders had gone rigid told her he already knew why she was there. "Tell me the truth." Her voice cut through the silence, sharp, unwavering. Lucien didn't turn around. "Serena?" His tone was quiet, almost a warning. She stepped forward, slamming the document she'd found onto his desk, the contract, the proof. No more half-truths, no more cryptic warnings, no more lies. Lucian's fingers curled slightly at his sides. You knew them. Still, he said nothing. Serena's chest tightened, anger and grief tangling into something suffocating. You knew them, she repeated, her voice breaking. And you didn't think I deserved to know? Finally, he turned. His face was unreadable, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes were dark with something she couldn't name. It wouldn't have changed anything. Serena let out a bitter laugh, her hands trembling at her sides. Wouldn't have changed anything? Her voice rose, sharp and incredulous. You don't think knowing that the man I was forced to marry had ties to my family before they died would have changed something? Lucian's jaw clenched. It's not that simple. Something inside her snapped. Then make it simple. Lucian didn't answer. And that silence was all the answer she needed. She sucked in a shaky breath, the betrayal slicing through her like a blade. You don't trust me. Lucian exhaled heavily, dragging a hand over his face, looking almost tired. It's not about trust. Then what is it about? Lucian hesitated, and in that moment, Serena knew he would never tell her. No matter how much she pushed, no matter how many times she begged for the truth, he would always hold it just out of reach. Like she was fragile, like she couldn't handle it. Her chest tightened, a painful weight settling in her ribs. I can't do this, she whispered, turning toward the door. Lucian stiffened. Serena. But she was already moving, her pulse roaring in her ears. She couldn't keep playing his game. If Lucian wouldn't give her the truth, she'd find it herself, even if it meant going to Victor. The drive to Victor Calloway's estate was a blur. Serena knew she shouldn't be here. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to reconsider. But she wasn't the kind of person who walked away from the truth. Not anymore. Victor was expecting her. He was already leaning against his desk when she entered, a slow, knowing smirk pulling at his lips. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with amusement. To what do I owe the pleasure? Serena crossed her arms, keeping her expression cold. Tell me about my parents. Victor's smirk widened. Ugh. He let the word stretch, tasting it. So you finally realized Lucian isn't the knight in shining armor he pretends to be. She hated the way he said it, hated that some part of her feared he might be right. Victor gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit. She didn't move. I'm not here to play games, she said sharply. Tell me what you know. Victor let out a slow breath, his amusement dimming slightly. Your parents weren't saints, Serena. His voice was low, almost pitying. They were involved in a world you don't understand, and so was Lucian. Her stomach twisted. Victor's gaze darkened. He wasn't just some distant acquaintance, Serena. He was in the middle of it all. Her pulse pounded in her ears. What does that mean? Victor tilted his head, watching her carefully, as if he was enjoying drawing this out. It means, he said slowly, deliberately, your parents didn't just die, Serena. They were killed. The air left her lungs. The room tilted. Her hands tightened into fists, nails biting into her palms. Victor continued, his voice smooth, calm, deliberate. And I'd bet everything I own that Lucian knows exactly why. Serena felt like she was falling. Lucian hadn't just known her parents. He had been a part of whatever had gotten them killed, and he had never told her. The weight of Victor's words clung to Serena long after she had left his estate. They were killed, and I'd bet everything I own that Lucian knows exactly why. The revelation had burrowed into her, poisoning every memory, every conversation she had ever had with Lucian, every evasion, every half-truth, every time he had controlled what she could and couldn't know. It all made sense now, and it made her sick. By the time she reached the mansion, Serena felt hollow. Before, she had been chasing answers. Now, she had too many. And every single one of them led back to him. When she stepped through the grand doors of the estate, he was waiting for her. Lucian stood in the foyer, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those dark, stormy eyes, were filled with something she couldn't quite name. He didn't move, didn't demand answers, didn't ask where she had been. He just watched her. Serena didn't stop. She didn't speak. She brushed past him, heading straight for her room, locking the door behind her. And for the first time since this all began, Lucian let her go. Serena paced her room like a caged animal, her emotions unraveling with every step. She had spent so much time trying to figure out who Lucien really was. Now she finally had her answer. And she hated it. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring at the wall, her thoughts colliding like crashing waves. But when the knock came, sharp, controlled, demanding, she knew it was him. For a long moment she hesitated. Then slowly, she opened the door. Lucien stood on the other side, his suit slightly disheveled, his expression cold, unreadable. But his eyes were darker than she had ever seen them. "Where were you?" His voice was low, but she could hear the tension beneath it, the barely contained fury. Serena lifted her chin. "Out." Something flickered in his gaze, something dangerous. He took a slow step forward, his presence swallowing the space between them. "You went to him." It wasn't a question. Serena's pulse stuttered. Of course he knew. Lucien always knew. "Tell me I'm wrong, Serena." Her throat was dry. She swallowed hard. "Tell me." His voice was lower now, lethal, his patience fraying at the edges. Serena didn't answer. And that silence, it destroyed everything. Lucien exhaled sharply, shaking his head, his fingers twitching at his sides like he wasn't sure if he wanted to lash out or walk away. "You went to Victor Calloway," he said, almost to himself, his voice rough, like the words physically hurt him. Serena forced herself to hold his gaze. "I needed answers, Lucien. And you." His expression snapped. Cold fury broke through. "I was protecting you." His voice was sharp enough to cut. His legendary ice-cold control was cracking right in front of her. Serena flinched, but he wasn't done. "You think I kept things from you to manipulate you?" His laugh was humorless, edged with something dangerous. "You think I wanted this?" She opened her mouth, but he didn't let her speak. "I kept you in the dark because the second Victor knew." The air shifted, and Serena realized too late that the real war had only just begun. Lucien's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath uneven, his control slipping. He ran a hand over his face, his voice dropping lower, almost hoarse. "You were looking for answers, and instead, you handed yourself over to the devil." The words hit Serena like a physical blow. Her stomach twisted, the sharp sting of regret cutting through her. Had she made a mistake? Victor had been convincing, so damn convincing. But looking at Lucien now, the hurt beneath the fury, the betrayal hidden behind the cold mask he always wore, something sharp twisted inside her. She had doubted him, and in doing so, she had broken something between them. Lucien let out a slow, uneven exhale as if forcing himself to calm down. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled again. Not the cold calculation she had grown used to, but something different. Something distant. "You want the truth?" His gaze met hers, unreadable, guarded. "Fine, you'll have it." Serena's breath caught in her throat. "But when you do," Lucien continued, his voice absolute, "you won't be able to take it back." A chill ran down her spine. Before she could say anything, before she could find a way to undo what she had done, he turned and walked away. This time, he didn't stop. And for the first time since stepping into his world, Serena realized maybe Victor wasn't the only one who had set a trap. Maybe she had built one herself, and she had just walked straight into it. Regret wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't just the weight in her chest or the ache in her bones. It was the cold realization that she had broken something that might never be whole again. And now she was trapped. Victor's estate was more fortress than home, and though she had agreed to come back for answers, she now understood. He never intended to let her leave. The one who got her out? Rowan. He had slipped past Victor's security in the middle of the night, a ghost in the shadows, his expression unreadable as he found her. "You shouldn't have trusted him," he muttered as they navigated the dark corridors. Serena had barely kept up with him as he maneuvered through the estate, her heart pounding in her chest. "I didn't trust him," she admitted, her voice raw. "I just didn't know who else to believe." Rowan shot her a sharp look. "And do you know now?" Serena swallowed, her throat tight. Yes, she did. She had made the wrong choice. And now, she had to fix it. The mansion was dark when she arrived, the weight of everything pressing down on her as she slipped through the entrance. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she moved through the halls. She knew exactly where to find him. Lucien wasn't the type to run when things got difficult. He faced them head-on, even when it hurt. And now, Serena had to be the one to face him. She found him in his office, seated behind his desk, a single glass of whiskey resting beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. But the air in the room felt thicker, heavier than usual. Her throat tightened. Lucien. His voice when it came was cold, detached in a way she had never heard before. "Why are you here?" She took a step forward, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. "I was wrong." That got his attention. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, his expression dark and unreadable. "About what?" Serena clenched her fists. "About you." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep going. "About everything." Silence. Then, slowly, Lucien set his glass down. "You went to Victor." It wasn't a question. His voice was unnervingly calm. Serena's breath stuttered. "You believed him over me." His words were quieter now, but somehow they cut deeper than if he had screamed. She had never seen him like this. She had betrayed him. And they both knew it. Lucien's voice was low, steady, but the force behind it was anything but calm. He rose to his feet slowly, his movements controlled, yet somehow more terrifying than if he had exploded in rage. "You handed yourself over to a man who would have destroyed you." Serena's breath hitched, her pulse hammering in her chest. "I made a mistake." Lucien let out a sharp exhale, shaking his head. "You didn't just make a mistake, Serena." His voice was laced with something deeper than anger. Disappointment, betrayal, something that cut sharper than a blade. "You shattered every ounce of trust I had in you." His words hit their mark, a precise wound, clean and deep. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "Then let me fix it." Lucien scoffed, turning away. "You can't." She moved before she could stop herself, reaching out, grabbing his wrist. "Lucien, please." He stilled. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, he turned back to face her. And that's when she saw it, the thing he had been hiding beneath all that fury. Pain, raw, unfiltered pain. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You asked me why I married you." Serena's pulse pounded so loudly, she could barely hear anything else. "I thought I didn't need you." His gaze never left hers. "I was wrong." Something inside her cracked wide open. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. This time, he didn't pull away. Her lips crashed into his. Desperation, longing, and something neither of them could name tangling together in the space between them. The taste of whiskey and anger, regret and relief. Lucien's hands found her waist, gripping her like he had been waiting for this just as much as she had. The kiss wasn't soft. It was bruising, raw, full of all the words they hadn't spoken, the trust they had broken, the things neither of them had been ready to admit. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Serena searched his face, trying to find something solid to hold on to. Lucien exhaled slowly. "You can't leave again." She nodded, her chest tightening. "I won't." It wasn't just a promise. It was a decision. One she had made long before she even realized it. The night was too quiet. Serena felt it before she saw it. The shift in the air, the tension wrapping around her like a vice. She had spent enough time in Lucien's world to recognize danger. But knowing it was coming didn't mean she was prepared. The moment she stepped out of her room, it happened. A rough hand clamped over her mouth. Cold steel pressed against her ribs. She struggled, thrashing, but they were prepared. A sharp pinch at her neck, a needle, a sedative. Her vision blurred, her limbs heavy. The last thing she heard was Victor Calloway's voice, smooth as silk, sharp as a blade. "Didn't I tell you, Serena? You should have stayed with me." And then, darkness. Lucien felt it the second he stepped into the mansion. Something was wrong. His gut twisted, every instinct in his body screaming at him as he strode toward Serena's room. A cold sense of dread crept up his spine. The door was open, his breath stilled. The guards, gone. Serena, gone. And on her bed, a single message was left behind. A playing card, face up. The King of Spades. Victor. Lucien inhaled slowly, his control razor thin. He had warned her. He had told her. This world would never let her go. And now, Victor had made his final mistake. Lucien was going to end this. Serena's head was heavy. Her thoughts were sluggish, her vision slow to adjust to the dim light pressing in around her. She blinked, trying to focus. A basement? No, a warehouse. Cold concrete beneath her bare feet, the sharp scent of gasoline and damp metal hanging in the air. Her wrists tied to a chair. And standing in front of her, Victor. Serena clenched her jaw. "You really have a thing for dramatic entrances." Victor smirked. "And you have a thing for making poor decisions." She refused to be afraid. She would not let him see fear. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady. Victor tilted his head, studying her. Leverage, my dear. His smirk widened, dark amusement flickering in his gaze. You were always the key to breaking Lucien. And now, he leaned in slightly, I have you. Serena let out a slow breath, her mind racing. She had been waiting for this. Serena had spent 5 minutes working at the ropes, binding her wrists, testing the knots, pulling just enough to loosen them without drawing attention. She wasn't weak anymore. She wouldn't be a victim. Victor stepped closer, his smirk dripping with satisfaction. That was his mistake. In one sharp motion, she twisted her wrist free, slipping from the restraints. Before Victor could react, she struck, her knee slamming into his ribs with full force. He stumbled back with a curse, but she didn't stay to watch. She ran. The guards lunged for her, but she was already moving, her body running on pure adrenaline. The door burst open before she could even reach it, and there he was. Lucien. His suit was wrinkled, dusted with blood, his face sharp with rage, his dark eyes were wild, lethal, and Serena had never felt safer in her life. A gun was in his hand, his finger steady on the trigger. Victor let out a low sigh, straightening, unbothered. I was hoping you'd come. Lucien lifted his gun, his expression stone cold. I came to finish this. Then, chaos. Victor's men lunged. Gunfire erupted. Serena dove for cover as the warehouse exploded into violence. Lucien moved like a predator, every shot precise, every step calculated, a cold, unrelenting force tearing through Victor's men. Serena refused to be useless. She grabbed a metal pipe from the ground, her fingers tightening around the cold steel. The next man who came for her didn't stand a chance. She swung. Hard. The impact cracked against the guard's skull, sending him crashing to the floor. Lucien saw. For a brief second, something flashed in his eyes. Pride. Then, Victor moved. A glint of silver, a blade in his hand. He lunged. Serena barely had time to react before Lucien's body moved before his mind did. A single gunshot rang through the warehouse. Victor staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. His knife clattered to the ground. Lucien stood over him, gun still raised, hands steady. Victor stumbled, his smirk faltering as he swayed. You, he rasped. His legs buckled. And then he was gone. The silence was deafening. Serena's chest heaved, her pulse hammering as she turned to Lucien. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then he closed the distance between them, his hands finding her face, his forehead pressing against hers, his breath uneven. Don't ever do that again, he whispered, his voice raw. Serena swallowed hard, her hands gripping his jacket. I had to. Lucien's fingers curled around her waist, pulling her closer. I can't lose you. Serena closed her eyes. She had spent so much time fighting him, doubting him, running from him. But right now, all she wanted was him. So she didn't pull away, and neither did he. The sirens blurred in her ears. The flashing lights of the ambulance were a haze against the darkness. Lucien's blood stained her hands, warm and sticky, but she pressed them against his wound, desperate. Her own heartbeat was erratic as they sped toward the hospital. Stay with me, she whispered, her voice shaking. You don't get to die, Lucien. Not after everything. His breathing was shallow, his skin too pale. For the first time since she had met him, Lucien looked breakable, and that terrified her. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sterile emptiness. Serena sat in the waiting room, her hands still stained red, her mind numb. At some point Rowan arrived, his presence a quiet weight beside her. He said something, a reassurance, a promise that Lucien was strong. But none of it mattered, not until the doctor appeared. He's stable, the man said, adjusting his glasses. We removed the bullet, he's lucky. Any closer to the artery and he wouldn't have made it. Serena felt the floor tilt beneath her. She swallowed, forcing herself to ask the only question that mattered. Can I see him? The doctor hesitated. He's still unconscious. But, yes. She didn't wait. She needed to see him. The room was too cold, too quiet. Lucien lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping softly, his skin ashen against the stark white sheets. The sight made something inside Serena splinter. She moved toward him slowly, as if afraid he would disappear if she got too close. She had seen him fight, had seen him unbreakable, untouchable. But here, lying in that bed, he was just a man. And she wasn't ready to lose him. Her fingers brushed against his, and a shuddering breath left her lips. She laced her fingers with his, gripping tightly, anchoring herself. You're an idiot, she murmured, her voice raw. A stubborn, reckless, impossible idiot. The monitors beeped. The room stayed still. Serena exhaled shakily, closing her eyes. "If you die, I will never forgive you." The words trembled with everything she had been too afraid to say before. Because the truth was clear now. She loved him, and she wasn't going anywhere. Serena had seen Lucian at his strongest, had watched him move like a force of nature, ruthless, untouchable, unbreakable. But now, lying pale against the stark white of the hospital sheets, he was just a man, and she wasn't ready to lose him. Her fingers brushed against his, hesitant at first, then firmer, as she laced them through his own, holding on as if that alone could keep him here. A shaky breath escaped her lips. "You're an idiot," she murmured, her voice raw. A stubborn, reckless, impossible idiot. The monitors beeped, a quiet reminder that he was still here, still breathing. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against their joined hands. "If you die, I will never forgive you." The words were barely a whisper, but they held everything she had been too afraid to admit before. Because now, there was no denying it. She loved him. And she wasn't going anywhere. The first thing Lucian felt was warmth. His body was heavy, sore, as if every muscle had been weighed down with lead. But something anchored him, a hand, small and warm, wrapped tightly around his own. His fingers twitched, a soft gasp. Then, Lucian. His eyelids dragged open, the world hazy, blurred at the edges before it settled, before she came into focus. Serena. She was right there, her eyes wide, red-rimmed, her lips parted as though she had been holding her breath. Relief crashed over him like a wave. "You're still here," he rasped, his throat raw. Serena let out a breathless laugh, caught between exasperation and something softer. "Where else would I be?" Lucian swallowed, his body protesting as he tried to shift. He was alive, but more than that, she hadn't left. His gaze locked onto hers, searching, because something in her had changed, something deep and unspoken that hadn't been there before. And then she said it. "I thought I lost you." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of it settled in his chest, deep and immovable. "And I realized I don't want a world without you in it." His chest tightened. "Serena." She shook her head, squeezing his hand tighter, grounding him. "I love you, Lucian." His breath stopped, restarted, thundered. His pulse pounded against his ribs, aching, not from the wound, but from her words. She loved him. Lucian had never asked for love, had never once in his life believed he would hear those words spoken to him. Not from her. Not like this. Slowly he forced his body to move, his hand lifting with effort to brush against her cheek. His fingers traced the path of a single stray tear, wiping it away. "You love me," he said, his voice hoarse, like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. Serena let out a shaky laugh, leaning into his touch. "Yeah," she whispered, "I do." A slow, aching smile pulled at his lips. "Then don't ever leave me again." Serena exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding, her own smile breaking through the tears. Never. The days blurred together in a haze of hospital monitors and whispered conversations. Lucian was healing, physically at least. The doctors reassured them that the bullet had missed anything vital, that with a few weeks of rest and physical therapy, he would be back to himself. But the real wounds, the ones that weren't visible, those would take longer. Serena stayed with him. She didn't leave. Not once. At first he had tried to push her away, telling her to go home, to sleep in an actual bed, instead of the uncomfortable chair by his bedside. But she had just crossed her arms, given him that stubborn look that always drove him insane, and said, "Shut up, Lucian." And that had been that. She was there for every checkup, every restless night. She was there when he woke up, gasping from memories that weren't dreams, his breath uneven, his muscles tensed as if ready to fight. And every time, her fingers would find his, grounding him, surrounding him, bringing him back. She was there. And for the first time in his life, Lucian let someone stay. Rowan arrived on the third day. Serena had stepped out to get coffee, leaving Lucian alone when the door swung open. Rowan leaned against the frame, arms crossed, his sharp eyes assessing him. "You look like hell," he said. Lucian huffed a quiet laugh. "Feel like it too." A beat of silence. Then Rowan exhaled, shaking his head. "I should have seen it coming." Lucian didn't need to ask. Victor, Serena, everything. "Victor going after her," Rowan continued, his voice tight, "using her to get to you." Lucian held his gaze. "Not your fault." Rowan let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "Maybe not." A pause. Then, quieter. "But I should have." Lucian said nothing, but they both knew the truth. This wasn't over. Victor might be gone, but the war he had started, it was only beginning, and Lucian wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Not when he had something to lose. Not when he had Serena. Lucian studied Rowan carefully, watching the way his friend hesitated before speaking. I should have done more, Rowan admitted, his voice quieter than usual. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, before continuing. I need you to know, I was never working with him. I'd never betray you like that. Lucian already knew, but hearing Rowan say it, seeing the regret in his eyes, the weight in his voice, it mattered. Yeah, Lucian murmured. I know. Rowan let out a slow breath, nodding. Good. He pushed off the doorway, about to leave, but then he paused, glancing back. You scared her, you know. His voice was lighter, but the meaning behind it was serious. Kala, she didn't sleep until she knew you were going to make it. Lucian's chest tightened. She loves you, Rowan added, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Still trying to figure out why, though. Lucian rolled his eyes, shaking his head, but the faintest hint of a smile lingered as Rowan walked away. Kala stood on the mansion's balcony, gazing out over the glittering skyline. The city stretched beneath her like a sea of endless light, pulsing and alive. It had been weeks since Victor was gone, since the war that had threatened to consume them both had finally come to an end. But some nights, she still woke up expecting something to go wrong, expecting to feel trapped again. But she wasn't. She was here. She was free. And somehow, after everything, she had found something she never thought she would. A home. A familiar warmth pressed against her back, strong arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her into his embrace. Lucian. She smiled as he pressed a soft kiss against her shoulder. You're supposed to be resting, she murmured. I'm fine. She turned in his hold, arching a brow. You were literally shot, Lucian. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I'm a fast healer. Kala rolled her eyes, but she didn't push him away. Instead, she let him pull her closer, resting against him as the city lights flickered below. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then quietly, she said, I thought I lost you. Lucian's arms tightened around her. You're not losing me, Kala. She looked up at him, searching his gaze. Promise? Lucian leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. Promise. Kala had spent her whole life dreaming of freedom. The kind that came with no strings attached, no expectations, no golden cages dressed up as privilege. And now, it was being handed to her. Lucian stood in his office, a single sheet of paper resting between his fingertips. His expression was unreadable, his storm-gray eyes locked onto hers with something she couldn't quite name. She swallowed. She knew what this was. The contract, the one that had bound her to him, the one that had forced her into this life, this marriage, this war. And now he was tearing it apart. The sound of ripping paper echoed louder than it should have in the stillness of the room. Kala exhaled shakily, watching as Lucian let the torn pieces fall from his hands, scattering across the polished wood floor. The weight of it should have lifted. She should have felt relief. But instead, she felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Lucian's voice was steady, but his grip on the desk was tight enough to make his knuckles pale. You're free. Kala's heart pounded. You don't have to stay, he continued, not looking at her now. You don't owe me anything. No more contracts. No more debts. You can leave, Kala. She didn't move, didn't breathe, because he meant it. For the first time since this had all begun, Lucian wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't forcing her hand. He was giving her a choice. Kala forced herself to speak, but when she did, her voice was quieter than she intended. And what if I want to stay? That made him look at her. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his expression, something raw, something unguarded. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. His walls slammed back into place, his voice cold, distant. This wasn't real, he reminded her, but the word sounded hollow, even to him. Kala stepped closer. You think this was pretend? She whispered. Lucian held her gaze. But his walls were back up, high, unshakable. You never wanted this, he said quietly. A small, breathless laugh escaped her lips. And then, she proved him wrong. Kala let out a breathless laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was tragic how little he understood. I didn't want to be forced into a marriage, she admitted, her voice steady. No, but you. She met his storm-gray gaze, holding it with unwavering certainty. "You were never the thing I wanted to run from, Lucian." He stiffened, his hands clenched at his sides. "I ran because I was scared," she continued, the words spilling out now, raw and unfiltered. "Because I didn't understand what this meant, what you meant." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't stop. "But now I know." Lucian exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if trying to push back the weight of her words. "Kala?" "I love you," she interrupted, stepping closer, closing the space between them. "I love you, and you're telling me to leave." His jaw clenched. "Because you should," he said, but the words felt hollow, lacking the conviction they once held. "But I don't want to." She reached for him, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, forcing him to see her, really see her. "I want to stay," she whispered, her voice trembling but certain, "not because of a contract, not because I have to." She lifted her chin, her next words unshakable. "I want to stay because I choose you." The breath he took was sharp, almost like he couldn't believe her, like he was afraid to. But Kala didn't waver. She waited, heart pounding, hands trembling against his chest. And then Lucian broke. His lips crashed into hers, desperate, claiming, like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. Kala melted into him, into the warmth of his touch, into the way his hands gripped her like she might disappear. She kissed him, not to prove a point, not because she felt she had to, but because she needed to. Because she had made her choice. And that choice was him. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, their breaths unsteady. Lucian's hands still held her tight, like he couldn't bear to let go. His voice was raw when he whispered, "I don't know how to be what you need." Kala smiled softly, brushing her fingers against his jaw, anchoring him to this moment. "You already are." His chest rose and fell, the tension in his body finally crumbling. Kala exhaled, pressing one last gentle kiss to his lips before whispering, "You were never my prison, Lucian." She laced her fingers with his, squeezing tight. "You were my escape." And with that, Kala and Lucian's story comes to an end. A tale of betrayal, redemption, and the undeniable pull of fate, a journey that started with force but ended in choice. What did you think of the story? Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments. If you loved it, give it a 10/10 and let us know your favorite moment. If it touched your heart, hit like and share with someone who loves a gripping romance. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories filled with passion, danger, and love that defies all odds. Bookmark, go back. Thank you for being here. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to bring you more unforgettable tales.